Hello, my name is Daniel YEHUDA and I'll be talking about lethal encounters between police and people with mental disabilities in Israel, a study performed by a group of volunteers for the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. On this study worked Dr. Lucy Acheson, Dr. Tzvi Beninga and Dr. Bettina Steiner-Burmans, together with me. Excessive police violence can happen anywhere. A review of the literature from many countries shows that people with mental disabilities, among others, are more likely to be subject to police violence than the general population. The present study examines examples of this worrying situation in Israel. It suggests possible explanations resting on local socio-political aspects of police-civilian interactions and their intersection with mental disabilities. It also provides recommendations for national authorities and for health professionals. We did a media search for fatal confrontations between Israeli police or security officers and people with mental disabilities in the years 2019-2020. We did not differentiate between police and other officers taking care of public order. We also searched only for violence against Israeli citizens in Israel, since the situation regarding violence against citizens of the Palestinian Authority is more complex and an issue by itself, as those Palestinian Arabs, rightfully or not, are anyway regarded in Israel as security threats. Searching the internet, we found 4 lethal and 1 severe but non-lethal encounter that reached the news. There may have been many other incidents that did not reach media attention, and we stick only to those incidents that got into the news, in the mainstream news. We found that all victims were men between the age of 23 and 32, and all belonged to socially disadvantaged groups in Israel. Let us now take a more detailed look at the specific cases. One of the 2 Arabs killed had autism and a cognitive disorder, whereas the other had epilepsy and a non-disclosed mental illness. A 3rd victim was a Jew of Eastern descent with schizophrenia and a substance disorder. The 4th victim was a Jew of Ethiopian origin with post-traumatic stress disorder, and the non-lethal incident involved an ultra-Orthodox Jew with cognitive and developmental delay. All 4 belong to groups that are to some extent considered marginal in Israeli society and have been referred to as second-class citizens. I'll share with you the tragedy of the incident of BIADGA, one of the 4 people killed. YEHUDA was a 24-year-old Jew of Ethiopian background with post-traumatic stress disorder and was known to social services. In January 2019, his family called the police to protect him and others from harm as he was threatening and holding a knife. They reported that he had a mental disorder and was not taking his medication. Shortly after, the police arrived at the scene. BIADGA was shot twice and killed. His family went to court and against the police, claiming that though he threatened, there are other ways to calm down someone who is mentally disturbed. But in July 2022, the Israeli High Court rejected their appeal. This is just one of the examples. What we see here is an issue of intersectionality. Intersectionality refers to the notion that multiple social categories work together as compounding risk factors. In this case, the risk to be killed by the police or a security officer. All cases we found involve intersectionality. All cases involved someone who belonged to a disadvantaged social group and suffered from a complex mental state as well. The following are the conclusions of this little study. Interactions between disabled individuals and the police are more common and dangerous than for those who are able. Intersectionality increases risk for these encounters to be lethal. We call on national institutes to be transparent in their reporting and investigate cases of police violence. And we call on health professionals to be aware of vulnerability of people with disabilities and document any incidents of police violence in medical files. When we refer to documentation by health professionals, we relate to documentation by means of ICD, the International Classification of Diseases. In fact, ICD-11 calls for better health with better information, so information is what we need. Both ICD-10 and ICD-11 have a code for legal intervention. This code reads as follows. Injuries inflicted by the police or other law enforcing agents, including military on duty, in the course of arresting or attempting to arrest lawbreakers, suppressing disturbances, maintaining order, or other legal action. So both ICD-10 and ICD-11 have codes, as you see on the bottom of this slide. And you can use these codes when documenting that a client had an encounter with a police officer, a soldier, or a security officer. This brings us to the end of this presentation on lethal encounters between police and people with mental disabilities in Israel. Unfortunately, we know that already since the end of this study, there were more cases of police violence as those we described. On behalf of Lucy Aitchison, Tzvi Benninga, and Bettina Steiner-Burmans and myself, I would like to thank you for joining us.